Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for the continuation of Mock Draft Monday here on the channel as we continue to inch closer and closer to the NBA Draft and the NBA Draft Lottery, which is coming up on May 16th. We're going to continue to simulate the lottery here on my end. This is something that's been heavily requested on the channel. Very excited to continue bringing these videos to everyone that looks forward to them. If you do look forward to these videos, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more, turn on notifications so you don't miss out on any other uploads here at Utility Sports. And I just want to highlight a couple things here with the lottery. The Rockets actually moved up to number 2 with their tiebreaker over the Spurs. Now that doesn't really impact their odds for the top overall pick, still at 14% chance, but it does change their floor. Their floor actually is now at lowest 6th overall instead of 7th, where San Antonio could potentially be picking that low. Now, it's not very likely they get there, but it is an actual possibility now at this point. I do want to highlight Indiana moved up as well to 7. And then you also see OKC down at 12, Orlando up to 11 with their tiebreaker. So there's been some movement. Those things will be reflected in this mock draft, as well as the winner of the lottery. So let's go ahead, sim it now. And the Washington Wizards, a team that really, I think lacks direction at this point, moves up to 1st overall, which I think is a really good thing. And 2nd, the Portland Trailblazers, two of the teams that I would probably highlight as teams with kind of unclear long-term pictures and long-term futures. Both of these teams have good players, but I think they both really badly needed top picks. We'll see what this potentially would lead Portland to do in this mock draft. San Antonio then picking 3rd. Indiana jumps up to 4. This would be, I believe, the 5th straight year that we've seen the team with the 7th best odds in the lottery move up if they are in 7th. And then now you see Detroit, Houston, Charlotte, Orlando all fall down in the draft. Dallas keeps their pick, another important thing to watch for. So let's get over to the actual mock draft portion. I hope you guys do enjoy that part of the video, and we'll get to it. Not only is it Mock Draft Monday here, it's also Manifestation Monday. I wanted to have a little bit of fun in this mock draft and just keep things light. I know that the lottery simulation on Tankathon doesn't always go the way that you'd want it to. So right now is your chance to manifest Victor Wembanyama landing with your favorite team by commenting Victor to blank, whatever team you'd like to put in there, whether that's the Detroit Pistons, Dallas Mavericks, Washington Wizards, like we're going to see in this video. Manifest your team winning the NBA Draft Lottery by commenting in the comment section Victor to blank. Let's just have a little bit of fun in this video and jump into that 1st overall selection here. The Washington Wizards on the clock. I have a Wizards offseason preview on the channel, so if you're a big-time Wizards fan, not only are you excited about this pick, but you should also go check out that video where it breaks down where the Wizards currently are at with their kind of retooling with a brand new GM. But hey, at least the first answer on the test is pretty easy for him here. Draft Victor Wembanyama. That's not going to be a difficult discussion. That's not going to be a difficult decision. And I feel like sometimes just with how great Victor Wembanyama is as a prospect, I know there is a lot of hype around him, but at the same time, I do feel like everyone's just kind of expecting this level of greatness. And to be honest, the expectations are going to be extremely high on him. But I do just want to point out all of the work that he's done to get to where he is, to be the unanimous, no doubt, no brainer, number 1 overall pick in the draft. That deserves a lot of recognition, and I just want to make sure that we continue to give him his flowers throughout this process, because he is such a unique, dynamic prospect, a player who I think would overnight change Washington from one of the least fanfare teams in the league. Not that their fans aren't diehards, because I think they are. You know, they went through the Andre Blatch and Nick Young days. They've been through a lot there in Washington. They're very committed, very diehard, but they just don't have the sheer volume of fans like some other fan bases. And Victor Wembanyama in a night would change that, no doubt about it. I actually have a fun little video that I'm planning on potentially recording at some point after the NBA Draft Lottery that kind of showcases Victor Wembanyama's upside and what he's going to bring to a franchise. I also have some other fun stuff on the channel too about Victor Wembanyama coming out. But for Washington, the specific fit here, my guess is that they're going to try and keep Kyle Kuzma, which is already a good start. If you do land Wembanyama, pairing him with Beal and Kuzma, already a very fun pairing, or excuse me, trio. And then I think the big question does, are they, kind of shifts to, are they able to keep Kristaps Porzingis? And if so, you have an alien and a unicorn in your front court. I'm not sure what that really means. I'm not into horoscopes or anything like that, but there's probably something good with having an alien and a unicorn in your front court. They would be so freakishly lengthy and athletic. I think that Kristaps, very, very good rim protector in his own right, plus Wembanyama, the length and size just would sheerly kind of scare teams and make teams less likely to drive and score at the rim. That level of rim deterrence is probably one of the most underrated elements of team defense in the NBA right now. Players who deter players from shooting within the restricted area or around the restricted area typically are some of the best defenders in the league. And I think Wembanyama has that element to him. And I think Kristaps Porzingis did show this year that he's progressed in that area a lot from where he started his career at. So I think Washington, although kind of a situation right now that's a little messy and I think requires some shifting and movement, Victor Wembanyama might be able to plug right in there and kind of solve a lot of those issues that they currently have. Second overall, we have the Portland Trailblazers. You're going to notice in the bottom right, I have this listed as a trade spot, which is ultimately what I would think would happen here. Now, when I was going through actually making this mock after recording the lottery simulation portion, this pick I paused on for quite a while. Usually it takes me about an hour and a half, 2 hours to even write up a mock draft. And that's just choosing who goes where. That's how much time is spent on the actual mock draft portion itself, not just counting the recording time and all the other graphics setup, that kind of stuff. I'm talking about just mocking players somewhere where I spend a lot of time thinking about, okay, does this fit actually make sense? And why would this team do this? What's their draft history? And I consider all of those factors, which is why I think I do fairly decent on my mock drafts. Not perfect, but decent. And I really struggle with this pick because to me, the clear obvious guy who would fit on this roster would be Brandon Miller. But I just am not in the same mindset as some others about Brandon Miller potentially being the second overall pick. I would just be shocked if that actually happens. I just don't think that's going to happen. So I realistically think on draft night that we do see the Portland Trailblazers draft Scoot Henderson. He will put on a Blazers draft cap here if this is how the lottery plays out. But this pick will ultimately be traded to whatever team wants to jump up for him. Now, in this video, I did not mock specifically who that would be or how this would play out, but I'm thinking something big. Scoot Henderson, his profile, the way that teams are going to view him, there will be a lot of interest moving up to this pick if Portland were to make it available. And my assumption is not only pick 2 would be available, but pick 23 would also be available with it. Plus, they have some young players that other teams might be interested in, say an Anthony Simons, for example. I don't think Shaedon Sharpe would be available. I'd be pretty surprised by that. But at the same time, and this is why Portland's very, very interesting to me, which is also why I landed with Scoot Henderson here at this selection, is because there still is the possibility of saying, look, we have our potential long-term franchise point guard via the draft. Is it time to say goodbye to another one? And I know a lot of Blazers fans don't want to do that, but I also know a number of Blazers fans would be interested in parting with Damian Lillard if they get the right amount of assets back. We're talking 3 to 4 first-round picks. We're talking some decent young players back. And then you kind of reshuffle the deck and say, look, we're trying to rebuild. And I think this fits well with the new management. So far, they've done a pretty good job drafting. You look at Shaedon Sharpe, Jabari Walker from last draft as the sample size that we currently have. Those are 2 players that you feel pretty good about their returns with where they were selected. I think Scoot Henderson, I could see him wearing a Blazers jersey, but I could also see them using this pick as massive trade bait to bring in something. I think if this pans out for Portland in the draft, it's almost a 100% perfect scenario for them because they have their optionality. They could decide, do we want to keep it and use it and build through the draft and maybe move off of Dame, or do we want to move off this pick and build around Dame? I think that's a real question management would have to ask themselves, and I want to know in the comment section what you would do if you were Portland and you landed second overall. What would you do with this pick? Do you build around Dame, trade the pick, or do you trade Dame, build around the pick? I think that's a really interesting question for this draft cycle and this mock draft specifically. Pick 3, we have the San Antonio Spurs here now, and Spurs, they stay at number 3 overall in this mock draft despite some of the other teams around them in that top 4 grouping falling. The Spurs, luckily for themselves, do not move down, and this is where I have them going with Amen Thompson. I know a lot of people are going to have their jaw maybe hitting the floor right now and say, whoa, Amen Thompson before Brandon Miller. I know that's not where a lot of people currently are at, but I'm telling you, May 16th, the week of the NBA Draft Combine specifically, there's going to be a lot more rumblings. We're a couple weeks away. There are going to be a ton of rumblings about, oh, Amen Thompson's really impressive. And wow, they didn't expect his athleticism to be that off the charts. think about Shaedon Sharpe. I know a lot of people have questions about Thompson's film and oh, well, he's played against younger guys, this, that, and the other thing. Shaedon Sharpe had only played against high schoolers and went 7th overall. I think a lot of people understand that Thompson's ceiling is significantly higher than Shaedon Sharpe's because he's more of a true point guard. He's got better playmaking feel. He's got a more electric handle than Sharpe had. And yes, he's 20 years old. That's not old, okay? Brandon Miller is 20 years old as well. He's essentially the same age as Brandon Miller. He's more athletic, freakishly athletic, probably the most athletic player in the draft. If I had to actually bet my life on it and bet my savings on it, I'd put my money on his athleticism because he's got the wide range of fluidity both laterally and vertically that I just think is unmatched. And then also the fact that his playmaking, he's just an unreal playmaker. I'm going to have a scouting profile out on the channel at some point here on Thompson. With how the offseason videos have been going, I've just been kind of really focused on that, but I've been trying to put together some scouting profile stuff too. There are still going to be quite a few of those videos coming out over the next couple weeks and months just before the NBA draft. So stay tuned for those, but Thompson for me feels like the right pick. I think the Spurs are really badly in need of a point guard. I think Thompson is a point guard, and if he gets used correctly, could become a superstar in this league. Pick 4, the Indiana Pacers now. They move up in this mock draft up to number 4. A great example of another team that had this exact same result, the Toronto Raptors, when they moved up and then ultimately selected Scotty Barnes over Jalen Suggs. I gave that selection an A+ on draft night, even though a lot of Raptors fans were kind of mad at me that I thought picking him over Suggs was a really good decision. Turns out it was a perfect decision for that organization. Scotty Barnes is a very, very good young player. And now at pick 4, the Indiana Pacers have a chance to add another wing who can be a really, really good player in this league, and that is Brandon Miller, somebody who before this season a lot of people viewed as a consensus lottery pick, but not a consensus top 10 pick. And that's exactly where I had him in my way too early mock about a year ago, where I had him going, I believe, 11th overall in that mock draft. You might have to go back and check that. There's some picks in there that obviously did not pan out the way I had projected, and I think Brandon Miller is one of them. He way outperformed his freshman expectations for me. His film in college has been so much better than his film was in high school, and that's because he's really progressed as a player. At a spot in your career, it's really tough to, during the season, take steps forward the way that he did. And I think one of the big positives about him, he played in a very pro-style offense for the Alabama Crimson Tide, which means he's going to adjust perfectly to Indiana, where, again, very pro-style offense, a lot of pick and roll. I know how Rick Carlisle likes to run his teams, and Brandon Miller's going to be a perfect fit into that team. Plus, you think about Tyrese Halliburton, the team's best player, probably the most prolific drive and kick player in the NBA right now. If not the most, he's definitely in the top 3. His drive and kick percentage is off the charts, and he's very, very good at it. That's the reason why he averages 10+ assists per game. There's a reason he was leading the league for assists for a good amount of the season, is because he's such a dynamic downhill slasher with the ability to read the floor at all times and never really be out of control and panic. You think about, the difference between a guy like him and Jordan Poole. Poole, it always feels like, oh my gosh, slow down, hit the brakes a little bit. And Tyrese Halliburton, you're just like, yeah, he's just playing his style. He's playing his space. It never feels like he's rushed or in a hurry, but he still is able to play quickly and make the right decisions on the move. And a guy like Brandon Miller around that fits so well, because not only do you not want to sag off of him because he's a fantastic three-point shooter with really good size and length that's going to be tough to contest shots as a closeout defender, but on top of that, he can be your offense when Buddy Hield's off the court, when Tyrese Halliburton's off the court, because he's progressed in areas as a ball handler, as a guy who can get his own shot off the dribble, and also somebody who there's a lot of hope out there that he does grow as a playmaker. I'm not going to bet on that completely, but even small improvements, small adjustments can help him go a long way. I think about a guy like Brandon Ingram, who came into the league not known as a playmaker, but has slowly, just the game slowed down for him, and he's been able to make more and more correct reads. I think that's kind of what we're seeing from Brandon Miller and to what he could potentially grow into. Now, Brandon Ingram is a really darn good player, and if Indiana gets a Brandon Ingram level player here, it's a massive home run for them. They have their long-term core. I think Mathurin fits in perfectly next to these two guys as well. Indiana moving up to 4 is a dream come true, especially if the board plays out exactly this way. Pick 5, we have the Detroit Pistons here now. Pistons fans, I know you might be a little bummed moving down to pick 5, but it's still not a bad spot for you here because there is a lot of talent in this draft. And I know this is a player that a lot of Pistons fans would love to see in those Pistons threads this next season. And that's Jarace Walker, who I think is actually a fantastic fit onto this current team. And I do think at some point Detroit's going to have to shift their mindset in terms of who's getting minutes. And I'm excited for a new coach to land in Detroit and ultimately kind of shift the direction of this team and kind of move away from some of these younger project big men and into more, hey, this guy's really good and we're going to try and win with this guy in the lineup 30 plus minutes a game. And I think that's the direction that they are trending. I think Jalen Duren's one of those types of players. I think obviously Ivy, Cunningham, we know are those types of players at this point. I think that also Jarace Walker is going to be that type of player. We know Bojan Bogdanovic is as well. So there's your likely starting 5. You've got versatility, switchability. I think both Duren and Walker can survive out in space, out in the perimeter. I think Cade Cunningham's calmness and presence on the court would go a long way in making just Detroit a lot more of a competitive team, going from 17 wins to, honestly, if this draft goes well for them, I could see them doubling their win total going into next season. Now, I know doubling 17 wins isn't astronomical, but that is a significant step forward. Think about where the Kings were a year ago. They added 18 wins to their ledger, and then they're 3rd in the Western Conference. Now, Detroit's got a longer way to go to get up to, say, number 3 in the East, but it's not that I'm projecting that. I'm just projecting them to be a lot more competitive, win a lot more games, and really have more competitive situations for those young guys, which I think is one of the most important stages of development. Is not only just, oh, hey, they need playtime. They need competitive playtime. I'm talking clutch time basketball where the game slows down. They have to value each and every possession. And I think Detroit's kind of lacked some of those possessions in games throughout the last couple of years. But this year's a year where they're going to get a lot more of that. Specifically adding Walker, who I do think would give them a lot more on offense than what they're currently getting from some of those 4 spots, especially when they're playing some of those 2 big lineups, whether that's Bagley or Stewart. I love Stewart. I think Stewart's a nice backup big in this league. I've been saying that now for about 3 years. I think that Jarace Walker kind of steps in, fills in the most needed position on this team. You have Bojan, Walker, Duren as your starting front court going into next season. I feel a lot better about that for Detroit long term. Detroit, or moving off of Detroit to Houston, another team here that maybe feels like, oh no, this is worst case scenario. I laid out how now they could only fall to 6 as their lowest, and that's what happened here. They fell all the way down to 6, and it feels like a nightmare, right? Well, it really isn't, and the reason why is because there's so many good players in this draft, and with the Houston Rockets, I feel like with Ime Udoka, their free agency cap space that they have, they're in a very strong position going forward with the opportunity to land not only good players in free agency, but a very, very, very good player in the draft. Plus, with the depth of this draft, some other good players as well later down in the board. And at 6, I have them going with Taylor Hendricks. Maybe a surprise here with some of the other players on the board. I know there's a lot of people that would prefer maybe more of a wing scoring archetype, but I think Houston's in a position where if they go out in free agency and make some of the moves that I'm expecting them to as I currently record this video, I think they have a really, really strong chance here to add in good defensive players who can also give you some certain elements on offense that would blend really well into an overall team archetype and also just flat out fit what Ime Udoka wants to do defensively. I think Taylor Hendricks is the perfect example of this because of his defensive versatility. He can play out in space defensively. He protects the rim at an elite level for a forward, which is really what I think he's going to be at the NBA level. He's going to be a 4-man who is going to be able to play small ball center and is also going to be a weak side rim protector, can probably use him as a pick and roll defender. And with the way Ime Udoka is going to want to cover in the pick and roll, he's going to be very daring to a lot of corner shooters to, oh, okay, well, we're leaving you open on purpose because we're going to shut down this pick and roll. And I think Taylor Hendricks is one of the perfect guys to have in that type of system where you almost zone out your defense a little bit, like what the Celtics used to do with Robert Williams. Hendricks would likely be in that role, and he would be sliding over to block a ton of shots at the rim. And they basically, a lot of the time, dare the other team to hit their role guy and say, we trust our backside guy here. And that would be Taylor Hendricks a lot of the time. You also think, well, they have Jabari Smith too. So they already have 2 lengthy, good defensive wings who can both block shots. Jabari Smith had over 50 blocks in his rookie season. I would expect Taylor Hendricks to amass that number as well, if not more. So I think this is a really fun fit for Houston. They also have another pick here later in the first round that they could add to it and get another nice piece, which I'm excited to see who I have them mocked here. I'm sure you guys are excited for that as well. And I think if Houston does the right stuff in free agency, I'm serious that they could be a playoff team next year. I really believe that. Now, it's going to take a lot to get there. I wouldn't necessarily 100% bet on it, but if they get what I think they can done in free agency, I would not rule it out by any stretch of the imagination. Pick 7, Charlotte Hornets here now, and again, feels not great for them moving all the way down to 7 with how tumultuous of a season they had. LaMelo Ball missed so much time with injury. Of course, the whole Miles Bridges situation played out. And you just are like, okay, well, we're kind of back to square one with this team. And what do we do? And how do we build around LaMelo with only pick 7? Let's start by just adding a really good wing. I think some of the best teams in this league, you think about the Boston Celtics, the Clippers when they're healthy, which doesn't feel like very often, but when they are, they're really, really good. I think we saw, even with a healthy Kawhi, what they could have done to the Phoenix Suns. They would have been a problem. And the Hornets here have a chance to at least start that process of getting a really good wing, and a wing who earlier in the year a lot of people would have thought was well off the board by this spot in the draft. At pick 7, I have them going with Cam Whitmore out of Villanova. He's about 6'7", 6'8", 235 pounds. He's got a really nice, strong physical body that's going to adjust to the NBA perfectly. Not very many rookies finish and ones. I think Cam Whitmore is going to have a decent number of and ones in his rookie season. You might be rolling your eyes a little bit at that, saying, okay, what's the importance of just and ones in general? Why would you only bring up that specifically? Because one, Cam Whitmore has a really good concentration level. That's an area where a lot of rookies tend to struggle, is finishing around bigger, lengthier, more athletic NBA level bodies at the rim specifically. I think we've seen a lot of guards struggle in that regard, and a lot of wings maybe not translate as well, which is part of the importance of putting on an NBA body. But Whitmore comes in with one of those, and he's going to be able to finish through contact. He's going to adjust very quickly to the NBA, which I think is a nice positive for him, but that doesn't mean he's at his ceiling already. I think there's a lot of areas for him to grow in. I think as a playmaker is one of the biggest areas he needs to take steps forward. I think right now the game feels a little fast to him. He's not reading the full court. That's okay. He's a wing playing next to LaMelo Ball. He's not going to be tasked to do some of those things, but at some point you're going to want him to take those steps forward. He's also showing flashes of upside as a shot maker from behind the three-point line specifically. I think he has to add to his mid-range game as well to become more of a well-rounded scorer, and somebody who, if teams are trying to cut off of some of his driving lanes, he can adjust to that, stop on a dime, and pull up for a little 15-foot jump shot. He has needs to develop and areas to improve on. But at 7, you're getting a guy who I feel very confident in is going to have a nice long career and is going to positively impact your team's ability to win. He's got the frame that you're looking for, and he's very, very good at something already, which is driving the basketball. Pick 8, we have the Orlando Magic here now. And at this spot for Orlando, I kind of approached this mock draft a little bit differently for Orlando than I typically have. Here at this spot, I'm going with Ausar Thompson, who's kind of a hybrid guard forward. At 6'7", he's the twin brother of Amen Thompson, who we saw go 3rd overall in this mock, and he does have similar skill set and similar upside. He's a freak athlete, more vertically explosive than he is side-to-side quick twitch. I think that's one of the big differentiating factors between him and his twin brother, which is why for me Amen does go significantly higher in this mock. But Ausar is still somebody who has some of that side-to-side quick twitch, just not as much as his brother. But he was more of a lob finisher in his time at Overtime Elite for the City Reapers. Oftentimes found himself on the finishing side of plays, but did flash a handle. I think it's somewhat more inconsistent than where Amen's currently is at, which I think does kind of raise a red flag a little bit. But for Orlando, I think the big thing here is you try and find more wing play and more kind of quick, freakish, athletic players that all of a sudden, you know, some of the things that Banchero is not going to bring, or Franz Wagner is not going to bring as much of, you have guys who can get up and down the court, who can play off the ball as cutters and divers, and can give you really good transition offense as well. I think that's where Ausar Thompson is really going to blow people away. His first year in transition, he's going to be fantastic, both as a break starter. He's a very, very good breakout passer. Did that a ton, actually, for overtime elite. Now, it's a smaller court. We're not going to see that as much at the NBA level, but I do think there's going to be times where he outlets the ball to half court and he's going to generate a 3-on-2 or a 2-on-1 for his team. And that's a huge win already because transition basketball is just so much easier than playing against a half court set defense. But also just with his pure athletic traits, he's going to be a guy who runs very well in transition. He's going to have the ability to push the ball himself in transition with his handle. And I think you give him time to grow, which I think Orlando has a lot of time here yet to focus on development. There's not really this big rush, at least there shouldn't be, to make the playoffs. Orlando, the whole point of moving off of Vucevic and Gordon and Fournier at the time that they did was to reset the cards and be done with being mediocre. If you try and rush everything and make the right trade, the big right move at the right time, it maybe screws everything up here and it just puts you back in the same spot you were. I'm not saying that that's a guarantee, but it's a possibility. Whereas if you take this thing patiently, you focus in-house development, you get everyone playing alongside each other and just focusing on taking the right steps each and every offseason, not the big step, you're going to get to a spot where you're very happy with the results. And I think Ausar Thompson can help benefit them in that area as well. Pick 9, the Utah Jazz here now. And with Utah, this has been one of my favorite selections here just because I'm really high on this kid's overall talent. And that's Anthony Black. He's just a calm, steady point guard. The upside's not going to be as high as an Ausar Thompson. So if we had a 100% guarantee that guys that have gone off the board 1 through 8 were to hit, Anthony Black would probably likely be worse than them. But there's no guarantee there. And there's things that change and there's players that adjust to the NBA differently. And sometimes we forget the personal aspect of that as well, that a guy, sometimes loses some of his training habits because he's now on the road 3 days a week instead of in one city all the time. There's a lot of things that adjust to that and kind of can change the way a player performs. Anthony Black to me is just going to be sound, solid, consistent. And he's got a lot of traits that really fit well in today's NBA. He's 6'7". He's good size for the position. He reminds me a lot of a Josh Giddey in terms of the way he's able to control the game as a point guard. Very good in the pick and roll, very adept passer. I think he's one of the best passers in this draft, if not the best passer in this draft, because he plays with the level of anticipation that I just don't really see in a lot of the other prospects, honestly. And he's able to fit passes in very tight windows because of that anticipation and just an understanding of, if I put the ball here at this time, at this spot, my guy's going to be the only one able to catch it. It's almost like an NFL quarterback a little bit, trying to layer a ball in past the second level of a defense. Anthony Black's got that level of passing capability to him. Very, very impressive. And a guy that I think the one big question right now is how often does he score the ball? But for Utah, I think that's okay. That's an okay question to have. And I understand why it would, theoretically hurt people's opinions on him and lower his draft stock. But I just really think that with the way the NBA is played right now, you look at a guy like him and how he's going to be able to impact the game defensively. He's got very active hands both on and off the ball. I think positionally he's very smart and intuitive in where he needs to be on the court defensively. And I think realistically, offensively, if he gets enough reps in as a shooter, a catch and shoot guy specifically, I don't think he's going to be a massively negative player. He's not going to be Dillon Brooks level bad offensively at times because unlike Brooks, he doesn't force shots. He's going to be willing to play within a role and understand that, hey, there's going to be nights where I shoot 4 times. And some nights maybe he'll shoot 12. It's going to be more dependent on how open he is. He's not going to create a ton of shots for himself, but he's going to create a lot of shots for other people, which I think long-term is probably the goal anyway for Utah. They didn't trade Mitchell and Gobert to just ultimately get pick 9. They went about this in a process to collect a ton of lottery talent, hopefully some top picks in addition. And Anthony Black fits in perfectly to that strategy because he's going to help amplify some of those future picks that come down the road. Pick 10, the Dallas Mavericks here. And again, this is another trade spot. The Mavericks, to me, it's really funny. There was a comment on the channel, I'm going to put it on the screen here, about how the Mavericks tanked for pick 10 when there's a draft here that realistically there's 9 guys or 8 guys that are surefire helps to this team. And it's probably one of the most accurate comments I've seen, honestly, just because it's just true. Every time I get to pick 10 in my mocks, I just am like, okay, well, Dallas needs this. I'm a Mavericks fan myself, so I've watched about 75 games this year of the Dallas Mavericks. I have a pretty good idea of what they need and what they miss and what they lack. And at 10, it's either you're going to reach for Dereck Lively at pick 10, which doesn't feel good to me, or you're going to trade out of this pick. and that's what I have them ultimately doing here. And I don't, again, have a specific team that would move up for them here, but I don't think I need to really for this mock draft to still make some sense and for us to have a good idea. The Mavericks are looking for win now talent. This is not for other draft picks. This is not to move down in the draft. This is we're trading out of the pick to get something, okay? And a team, at some point, some team might shift some things up, move off of a contract, whatever. And the team right behind Dallas here is the Oklahoma City Thunder, basically. You also have the Orlando Magic in here. But G.G. Jackson's going to be really, really a targeted prospect by a lot of teams based on the upside that he showed at South Carolina. Now, he had a really rocky freshman season. I don't think it's completely fair to him that, he's gotten so much love while Amani Bates got so much hate. I don't think it's fair to Amani Bates either. I think G.G. Jackson's going to have a rocky rookie season probably, but there'll be flashes in there that really excite teams and get a lot of love on social media as well. And I think he's flashed enough that some team would consider him here around the top 10 in a trade with the Dallas Mavericks. Again, this pick, I mean, even if Dallas were to stick here and take G.G. Jackson, I could at least say, look, they're trying to do something that's going to be good for them long term. So I don't necessarily hate it. G.G. Jackson does give them some things that they're missing, like another guy who can dribble the ball, another guy who can jump and run and is athletic. These are all things that sound super basic for building a basketball team, but somehow the Dallas Mavericks have overlooked all of those things because they don't care about rebounding or rim protection. They don't care about dribbling. They don't care about shooting or passing, seemingly. They just care about, star A plus star B, which has gotten them where they are right now. But at the end of the day, I mean, G.G. Jackson's an intriguing prospect. I could see a team moving up for him, and I see Dallas being a serious trade down destination or trade out destination specifically, just like I talked about with the Portland Trailblazers earlier at pick 2. Then pick 11, the Orlando Magic here now. This pick comes from the Chicago Bulls and that Nikola Vucevic trade I referenced earlier, and I switched it up in this mock. A lot of the times I've been going with good player at pick number 8 or their first pick in the first round. And then with the second pick here around pick 11, pick 12, I've been consistently mocking them a shooter, whether that be a Gradey Dick, a Jordan Hawkins, a Brandon Pajemski, someone like that who can fill a seriously big need on this team. I opted to go a different route this time for Orlando. So now their draft here pairs Ausar Thompson and Nick Smith Jr., which is a little bit more of a swing on upside and long-term development, which is what I like for this team. It gives you another guard, a 6'5" guard to be specific, who can handle the ball, very good touch, especially downhill as a slasher. He's got a fantastic runner that I think is going to be very, very reliable at the NBA level. It's going to be one of the tools that Nick Smith Jr. relies on a lot as a rookie to kind of control his finishing ability and to kind of mitigate shot blocking. I think he's going to find a lot of success at the NBA level. Part of the reason why he falls out of the top 10 for me here in this mock is there's going to be questions about his knee. He missed some time this year for Arkansas because of that knee. So as a draft prospect who's pretty young and already having some knee issues, does that come into the minds of decision makers in the NBA? I think it probably does a little bit. Hinders his draft stock just a hair, but he's probably got top 7, top 8 talent if things were to go right for him in his career because of his ability to make shots on all 3 levels. I think he's a pretty good fit into Orlando, who, yes, they got a lot out of Markelle Fultz, but long-term, we're still looking to see if this team can theoretically put everything together and just continue to add more talent to their roster. I think Nick Smith Jr. fits that. And then you might be wondering, well, what about the shooting then? Because shooting is a significant problem. They finished in the bottom 8 in terms of 3-point percentage, bottom 4 in terms of 3-point attempts this year. So they were a low volume 3-point shooting team and a poor 3-point shooting team when they shot on a low volume. So how do they add shooting? Well, they have a lot of cap space this offseason. Do they try and take in a Duncan Robinson contract and see if they can even get a couple second-round picks with it or something? I know that doesn't sound super sexy, but I think we saw in the first round of the playoffs, Duncan Robinson is not as big of a negative player as everyone likes to make him out to seem. Could he help Orlando in spot minutes? 100% he could. He would give them something they don't have right now. Think about what the Kings did with Kevin Huerter this year. To me, there's not really an argument on how Duncan Robinson's a significantly worse player than Kevin Huerter. I understand people are going to say defense or, Huerter made more of his shots. Yeah, when you also have a coach that benches your best shooter, I'm sure the shooter's going to have a little bit of hesitancy shooting, and especially if he's in a cold spell when he gets benched. It's just, I don't think it's the best management there when it comes to one specific player. Now, Spoelstra is a great coach in general, and a lot of you Magic fans probably have close eyes on that Heat situation just based on relativity, how close you are relatively to Miami based on geography. So I think that Orlando here could look to add some shooting in some way. It doesn't have to be Duncan. I'm just saying go out and get some type of shooter using money, using cap space, whether it's through a trade or through free agency. You have options there. So it doesn't have to be through the draft. That's what I've mostly mocked so far, but I did want to show one other pathway that Orlando could look to go about improving their team going into next season and long term. Pick 12, the Oklahoma City Thunder here now. And don't worry about those shooters. They're not going to fall very far in this mock draft. At least Dariq is not. He's going 12th overall here in this mock to the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I know a lot of Thunder fans are going to maybe pause here for a second and say, you really think Sam Presti would do that? And they might have a little bit of a puzzled look on their face right now. But I really think this is actually a phenomenal pick for Oklahoma City for a few different reasons. First of all, think about how good Isaiah Joe was this year. And Isaiah Joe was a player I really liked coming out of Arkansas. I thought his shot making was very undervalued in his own draft. Going in the second round, I was pretty shocked by that, to be honest. I thought he could have slid up into the first round of his draft. Ultimately did not. And I was also very surprised when the 76ers moved off of him for really no apparent reason in my eyes. And now, Oklahoma City reaped the benefits of that. And Thunder fans are probably going to be saying, oh, well, if we have Isaiah Joe, why do we need Dariq? Because drafting Dariq basically means you have 48 minutes of either Isaiah Joe or Isaiah Joe plus, because Dariq is a better player than Isaiah Joe. He's a better finisher. He's bigger than Isaiah Joe, significantly bigger. He's 6'8". He's able to crash the offensive glass. He can handle the ball to a certain extent. The passing, I know Thunder fans are going to say, well, Sam Presti likes to draft, dribble, pass, shoot. That's really been his big thing lately. And I completely agree to that. Dariq's not fully there yet, but he's like 80% of the way there. He can pass in transition. He can dribble in transition. He's not 100% confident in that yet. But think about the way Isaiah Joe played this year for Oklahoma City. That's the role that I'm seeing him playing in. And they found a lot of success with Joe on the floor. They were a very, very good team when Isaiah Joe was playing a lot of minutes. And I think now you can tell yourself on saying, okay, 48 minutes a game, Dariq or Isaiah Joe is going to be out there. And against specific matchups, maybe you could even play both of them and really stretch out that floor for either Josh Giddey or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to really be downhill attackers. You also think about Chet Holmgren coming back in. Some of the defensive questions around Dariq, I think, should be eliminated just with how athletic and lengthy this Thunder team is around Dariq. They're going to be able to hide some of those things, especially with Chet Holmgren being a fantastic shot blocker on the back end. I think that's really going to be the biggest storyline going into next season is Chet Holmgren's rookie year with OKC and how that just changes that team in general. But let's get another shooter in there. Let's just make sure that we have the spacing around the best players for the Thunder that we need, and Dariq's going to be fantastic in that area. Pick 13, the Toronto Raptors here now. Raptors fans, you might be familiar with this face. Cason Wallace here goes 13th in this mock, and the reason why is I just continue to feel like this is a home run fit for the Toronto Raptors, and just a player that I just can't really see them passing on if he's available at this spot, because one, they have question marks about their guards long term. Both Van Vliet and Gary Trent Jr. are going to be free agents this offseason. So naturally, just based on position, it makes a lot of sense. But also looking past that, Cason Wallace is just a really good basketball player and a guy who I think Masai Ujiri would fall in love with because of his defensive capabilities as a guy who can slide over and be a help defender. He's got very active hands on the backside. Some of the things I praised Anthony Black for, I think Cason Wallace has similar skill sets. Now he's a significantly worse passer, not because he's a bad passer, but just because Black's such a gifted passer. I think that Wallace is going to be a solid passer. He's going to make the right pass at the right time. And I also think he's going to be a timely scorer, someone who can step into a mid-range jump shot and knock it down when he needs to, when the defense is rotating off of him. He's going to knock down some big shots. And I think he's going to have a really, really, really good career. Cason Wallace at 13 feels like a steal to me, honestly. This draft is loaded, though. Pretty much every time I'm doing the lottery here and talking about where these guys could potentially go, it always feels like to me like, wow, Dariq just went 12th overall. Cason Wallace is going 13th overall. And then I'm kind of like, am I too low on these guys with where they're potentially going? And I look above them and like, well, shoot, if G.G. Jackson actually gets drafted in the top 10, like, which I think is a realistic possibility, can I really move this guy lower? There's just a lot of things I'm like looking at. I'm just like, wow, this is, you know, it's tough for me, honestly, which is shows I'm putting in a lot of work trying to find the best spots, and I'm really critically thinking here between these players and why they would potentially go where they are. It seems like I always land for Cason Wallace at 13. Now, if a team really likes him and drafts him before this spot, I wouldn't be shocked at all. I really like this kid, but for me, it almost feels like 13 is like the 100% definitive floor for him, assuming the Raptors don't move up in this year's draft. Then 14, the New Orleans Pelicans here, the final pick of the lottery. And for the Pelicans, there's a few things I like here at this spot. There's a lot of players that I would strongly consider, but a player that has received and garnered a lot of lottery love, specifically late lottery love, after the conclusion of March Madness has been Jordan Hawkins, who had a fantastic March for himself, specifically shooting the ball from behind the three-point line as a sophomore. That's his greatest strength right now. And that's really the one strength that I think does translate to the NBA. He's a really good movement shooter who has ran off of thousands and thousands of stagger screens in his career, because that was a huge staple in what UConn was looking to do with their offense. And because of that, he's going to step into the NBA. And if a team asks him to run off the ball and move around in the half court and find success that way, he's going to be capable of it, which gives him a very clear, concise role to fit into, which is one of the best things when you're looking for a fit in the draft, and how a guy can be a positive impact even in his rookie season, which is somewhat typically rare, especially outside of the top 5, top 10 picks. I think Jordan Hawkins can have a positive impact, but there's other areas where he's just flat out not very good. He's not very good as a finisher. He's not very good around the rim in general. I think that his playmaking is somewhat lacking. And I think defensively, he's still a question mark at this point. Now, does he have the upside in terms of physical athleticism, length, size, for a guard to maybe fill in some of those things and not be terrible at any of them? Yes, 100%. I just think it's going to be a long road to get there, and he's not ready year one to give you those things. But for New Orleans, they have so much depth that if Hawkins just doesn't really pan out year one and you're not confident giving him more than 8 minutes a game, they just don't have to. We saw it with Dyson Daniels, where when Daniels was playing well, they'd reward him and give him minutes. But if it wasn't a night for Dyson Daniels to play, or he wasn't playing very well, there was no issue with saying, yeah, you're just not playing tonight, or you're not going to play very much tonight, because they have the depth. They have guys like Najee Marshall, Herb Jones, who can hold down those wing spots for quite a while. Obviously, Zion when he's healthy, Brandon Ingram, CJ McCollum. They've got a lot of nice players already. There's not a reliance here at this pick for New Orleans to find a day one impact contributor, but if they're looking for one, it's going to be someone who can come in the form of a movement shooter, which is exactly what Jordan Hawkins is. Now, outside of the lottery, we have the Atlanta Hawks here now at pick 15. And for this team, for Atlanta, I think, first of all, we know Quinn Snyder's a good coach. Quinn Snyder was a fantastic hire by the Atlanta Hawks. I think he would have received a lot of interest this offseason in head coaching searches had he waited for a position to open up. But he decided the pay was right, the timing was right, and the destination was right in Atlanta. And because of that, now he's going to have somewhat of a say in this roster and how to go about building this team. And that's why I landed here on Dereck Lively out of Duke, which is an interesting selection here because Clint Capella did play fairly well down the stretch of the season. I know that they also have Onyeka Okongwu, and I know that they have John Collins on their roster right now. I understand that big man is probably not. I know that big man is probably not at the center of attention for a lot of Hawks fans, but I do think, first of all, center is one of the hardest positions to draft. So when there's a guy you like, you should flat out take him. Lively at 7'1" with a fantastic wingspan and standing reach is somebody who is going to be very intriguing to a lot of teams around this range of the draft, right in the back end of the lottery or a little bit later. I think Lively, this is the right range for him. And the other thing about drafting big men, if you want a big man to be good for you, and he's not the first or second or third overall pick, you probably should draft him 2 or 3 years before you really need him. I think a great example of this is Robert Williams for the Boston Celtics. You go look at Robert Williams' career on Basketball Reference, you're going to notice his first couple of years in the league, he wasn't playing 30 minutes a night. It's just not how his career panned out. Big men, they are oftentimes the most relied on player on the court defensively. And that usually means you need a lot of time to grow into learning what the NBA is about, what your team's expecting from you defensively, what rotation should look like, when you should be the help guy, when you should not be. How do you box out while also being the help guy? There's a lot of stuff. And then we haven't even talked about the pick and roll yet. When do you play at the level? When do you blitz? When do you play back and drop? And what do you do in drop? There's a lot of questions for centers that really a lot of the times throughout the regular season, they can become massive points for a team. Look at what James Wiseman was for Golden State early in his career. So you need to have patience with a big man. So you draft him early before you need him. Quinn Snyder's going to love a guy like Dereck Lively because he found a lot of success with a similar player in Rudy Gobert, who Lively similarly does not have a lot of offensive talent. He's not going to be able to be a go-to post-up player for you. He's not going to be somebody you want to consistently hit on the short roll and say, okay, go make us a play here on the move. But what I do think he has is a good understanding of what his role should be on offense. He plays within himself. I think he can be a decent passer against zone defenses, which is a nice little positive plus. Just don't ask him to dribble and pass at the same time. That's going to be a little bit complicated for him. But at the same time, like, he's going to be a perfect fit with Trae Young because he's big, lengthy, block shots. And again, give him some time to develop. And I think Atlanta can really afford to do that. This is a good fit for Lively. I think this is a good selection for Atlanta as well, and different from what I've been typically mocking for them. Pick 16, we have the Utah Jazz here now. This pick comes from the Minnesota Timberwolves from that Rudy Gobert trade that we've mentioned so many times on the channel. But here with Utah, after going with Anthony Black, 9th overall, we're going with another guard. And I know Jazz fans are already going to be puzzling themselves a little bit here, and they're going to be looking at me and saying, what is this guy doing? Okay. They're going to be typing in the comment section, really, we need wings. I know you do, but again, the expectation here for Utah is to not win right away starting next season. I don't think that they're in a rush to be a playoff team, and that's 100% okay. They want to continue accruing talent and adding it to their roster long term, and Keyonte George is a completely different style guard than Anthony Black anyway. You know, some people are going to say, oh, well, no wings is really bad. I mean, Anthony Black's 6'7", so you want to take a 6'8" wing and not a 6'7" guard who can also dribble and pass? Like, to me, that just doesn't really make that much sense to do at 9. And then at 16, you just take off talent here. And Keyonte George is extremely talented. He's going to be a good shot maker. I think realistically, he could grow into probably at his ceiling, maybe a Jordan Clarkson type player, maybe a little bit better than that if things were to hit for him and pan out. I'm typically a little bit lower on players like Keyonte George of his style. But there is clear roles for guys like him in the league. And when he's hot, he's really, really hot. And he's able to knock down some amazing shots. There's, moments this year for Baylor where he's knocking down, fading away corner threes as the buzzer expires. And just really sometimes willing Baylor to wins that with a down year this year, they just weren't really in position to win as many games as you would typically, associate with Scott Drew and the Baylor Bears. He did a nice job kind of keeping their season afloat throughout the middle of it. And I think because of that, Utah would strongly consider him here and just draft based off of talent and then worry about long-term fit and positions later on. Pick 17, LA Lakers here now. Playing in the second round of the playoffs the time I record this. Not actively yet, but they've advanced, which is a huge kudos to them. Big congratulations for the Lakers, which is a crazy turnaround for where their season was at. And 17th here, I have them going with Jalen Hood-Schifino, who's a 6'4", 6'5" guard who can handle the basketball, very, very comfortable in the pick and roll, which is one of the things I like about him here. For the Lakers is another playmaker who can come off the bench and just make the right reads. Now, Austin Reeves has really grown into that this season for the Lakers, and I think he's been a fantastic player for the Los Angeles Lakers, but he is heading towards a restricted free agency. I think a team will probably look to pursue him strongly, and the Lakers will have to make a decision on whether or not they should match the contract that he's ultimately going to sign. My expectation currently is that they will, but at the end of the day, they just need more good backcourt players. I think that they still could use another guy in that room behind D'Angelo Russell, behind Austin Reeves, and like I said about center, point guard's a similar position where if you draft a point guard and you expect them to come in and be home runs right away and they were picked outside the lottery, you're just going to have probably a rough season. I think a great example of that is Kyle Lowry. Kind of bounced around a couple of teams before really finding his footing in the NBA. Statistically was not productive and wasn't really impacting winning the way that we've since associated Kyle Lowry with being able to do. And it's because the game slows down. They become more comfortable in the NBA and playing around the speed and length that they do. I think out of all the guards, Jalen Hood-Schifino is somebody who's going to be very, very comfortable immediately. stepping into that role and being a guy who is going to have the gameplay rather slow for him. He plays off of 2 feet, which is already a big positive. He's got a sound mid-range jump shot. I think the Lakers here, it should just be about talent acquisition, finding guys that you think are going to be good basketball players. I think Hood-Schifino is going to be one of them. Then we move into pick 18 here now with the Miami Heat at this spot. The Heat also in the second round of the playoffs and actually won game 1 against the New York Knicks. So they're 3 wins away from the Eastern Conference Finals, which is pretty crazy because they, going into the playoffs, were not a team that a lot of people respected or feared as much as I thought they should have. I even said in my playoff prediction video that a team like the Boston Celtics, because I recorded before the play-in, should maybe be worried about facing a Miami Heat team that has Jimmy Butler and playoff experience and a good coach. And here at this spot, they have the opportunity to add quite a bit of talent here, which is why I have them going with Dariq Whitehead, a player who I really, really like. I think he has fantastic upside for the Miami Heat. He's a really, really good shooter of the basketball. And if you look at this team, Max Strus is a potential free agent this offseason, as is Gabe Vincent. So they might have to worry about how are they going to shoot the basketball next season. I think Dariq Whitehead is one of those guys who at 6'6" can step into the NBA and give you one really, really good skill to start, and that's shooting. Similar to what we talked about with Jordan Hawkins, is Dariq Whitehead going to have it every single night? Maybe not. I think that one big issue with him is at Duke, he didn't really find his footing and consistency in terms of whether he was a starter or not, and his minutes per game kind of fluctuated. He missed a little bit of time to begin the year, and I think that really set him back the entire season. But even with all of those setbacks, he still was rather efficient, especially as a shooter. And I think that he's got more long-term upside, in my opinion, than a guy like Jordan Hawkins. If I was drafting, I would probably select Dariq Whitehead over Jordan Hawkins myself. Now, I know that the film doesn't necessarily suggest that that's wise, but I think that the long-term outlook is quite a bit higher with Whitehead than where it was with Hawkins, just because of his ability as a slasher. I think he's got more capabilities with the ball in his hands long-term. And because of that, I think Miami could be getting a really nice value pick here, but also a guy who doesn't really hurt them at all in year one, trying to focus his development because he has a clear role that he can also fit in and play alongside guys like Jimmy Butler, Tyler Hero, Bam Adebayo, and find success early on in his career. Pick 19, Golden State Warriors, now also playing in the second round after a crazy 7-game series against the Sacramento Kings. I want to credit both teams here, both the Warriors and Kings, for what was an awesome, incredible, lengthy series that I wish never ended, honestly, because it was so much fun to watch. But the Warriors here get to add a guy who looked very, very similar to a player they were facing in that 7-game series. And Warriors fans and Warriors players might be freaked out a little bit and said, "You again?" But this is actually not Keegan Murray. This is his twin brother, Kris Murray, who looks identical to him and has a very similar game style and play style. Now, he is left-handed. He's got a very nice stroke, though. He's going to be able to shoot the 3-ball very, very well. And I think one of the things that Keegan Murray offers to the Sacramento Kings is what Kris Murray is going to offer to the Golden State Warriors, and that is size and shot making and playing within himself. Keegan Murray, for the most part, didn't have the best series you would hope for from him just based on how good his rookie year was, but that's just how the playoffs are. Playoffs speed up. Rookies tend to, speed up themselves, and because of that, they struggle. And obviously, I'm not saying the playoffs speed up in terms of pace or anything, but the intensity ramps up and the game is just different. So because of that, we saw Keegan Murray kind of take a step back, although he had awesome moments for sure in that series. I think Kris Murray could be a guy who throughout the regular season gives the Warriors similar things to what Keegan Murray gave Sacramento. Now it's going to be on a much lesser volume, but you look at Golden State long term, I think the writing's on the wall that at some point they're going to need to find smart, good forwards who can fill in behind Draymond Green. He is on a player option this season, so potentially could be his last playoff run with Golden State. I would bet against that at this point. I think a return to the Warriors is more likely than not. But Kris Murray, I think, would be a really nice sound addition to this roster. I think that they do need more size. They need wider frames in their front court behind their two beasts in Kevon Looney and Draymond Green. And I think that a guy like Kris Murray, who is sound, smart, is going to step in and play good basketball for them in a team-oriented fashion, is a perfect addition to a team that moves the ball already very, very, very well. Pick 20, we have the Houston Rockets here. Now, this pick comes from the Los Angeles Clippers, and I think for the Rockets, one thing that I'm specifically looking for here to kind of go with that Taylor Hendricks pick at 6 is more length, more shot blocking, more size. And we find it here in Trayce Jackson-Davis. Rafael Stone was very, very clear, as was Ime Udoka in press conferences, especially after the season and after his hiring, where they want other additional bigs on the roster. Now, it's not a shot at Alperen Şengün. They're not doubting Alperen Şengün as an individual player, but there is a need on this team to add other styled big men behind him. And I think Taylor Hendricks, Trayce Jackson-Davis are both uniquely different from Alperen Şengün in a really positive way. I think Trayce Jackson-Davis more of a true rim and roll guy, where he's going to run the rim very, very hard in transition. He's going to be an above the rim finisher. On lob play specifically, he's also a very, very good athlete defensively in terms of protecting the rim. Some of those things are similar to Taylor Hendricks, but he's also kind of got some characteristics that Alperen Şengün possesses as well as a passer. Now, Şengün, I think, is a little bit of a flashier passer, but you could argue Trayce Jackson-Davis is maybe somewhat of a more consistent passer with how quickly he gets off the ball. He's not going to turn the ball over very much because he's just smart and understands, well, this is how things need to play, whether he's working out of a post-up. I think if you draft Trayce Jackson-Davis and you already have Alperen Şengün, Houston should run probably 20 post splits a game, similar to what Golden State does, because you have the big men to do it in LP and in Trayce Jackson-Davis, two guys who are fantastic passers out of the post. But I also think you can hit Trayce Jackson-Davis on a short roll, and he can hit a lob pass to a guy sitting on the backside, similar to what we've seen Draymond Green do so many times. And if Houston wants to put good front court players around Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, around potentially a James Harden, I think this is a home run draft. You walk away with Trayce Jackson-Davis and Taylor Hendricks. You added 2 shot blockers, 2 guys with incredible length and size. One of them, and Hendricks, can step out behind the three-point line and knock it down rather consistently. The other one's a plus playmaker for his position. And overall, you added 2 guys who I think can really contribute to winning right away in the league, which is very rare to find. Pick 21, the Brooklyn Nets here. Now this pick comes from the Phoenix Suns in the Kevin Durant swap. And at this spot, I have the Nets going with Noah Clowney. Talking about what coaches are looking for, Jacques Vaughn has been very clear since taking over as the head coach of the Brooklyn Nets that they are lacking a lot of size and rebounding ability. And those are the things that Noah Clowney gives you. He's not the biggest guy in the room, but he's relatively strong for his age. He's also a just purely good rebounder who played in a pro style for Alabama. I referenced that earlier, talking about Brandon Miller. And I think this is a really good fit for Brooklyn, who's searching for a backup big who can really crash the glass behind Nick Claxton. And I think Noah Clowney's a really good fit for them and also gives them a different style big man. Claxton not really known as a guy who's going to step out, knock down the long ball. I think Clowney's going to grow into that. Now, it's going to maybe take a year or two before we really get to see that consistently from him, but the upside's there. He did it in college a decent amount, multiple games with 2 or 3 plus three-pointers made. Now, it was still somewhat inconsistent and irregular. His three-point percentage does not make him look like he's a good shooter, but for his position, for his size, I think that we've seen the beginning stages of what we need to if he's going to become a solid shooter at the NBA level, which is what I expect him to grow into. 22nd, staying on the topic of the Brooklyn Nets, for them here, a player that I do also really like is Brice Sensabaugh. Now, I think that the Nets could potentially look to shop both of these picks, both 21 and 22 in this year's offseason, just because they're going to be looking to upgrade the roster in a variety of ways. They've got a lot of middling contracts that they can attach to make some big move if they want to, and realistically, they could help themselves significantly by moving off of certain players and just shifting their cards around a little bit. But if they do stick here with these picks, Brice Sensabaugh makes sense as well as a guy who long-term could grow into a nice half-court scorer. I think a lot of people, you're probably going to hear comparisons to DeMar DeRozan. He's not going to be as skilled as DeMar DeRozan. He's not as athletic as DeMar DeRozan was. I think people forget that when DeRozan was younger, he was a slam dunk participant because he was very athletic. I think Sensabaugh is a little bit less athletic than him, but he's maybe a little bit more advanced than DeRozan was coming into the league when it comes to working out of the triple threat. He's got a very, very good open rip jab, also a closed rip jab. He can go right, he can go left, and score the ball going both ways. Now, I think as a shooter, he does prefer going left, which is not very atypical. I think even guys like Kevin Durant, we've seen that, where if Durant's attacking right, he likes to get to the rim, and if he's attacking left, he likes to stop and pull up. Sensabaugh's got a little bit of that to him. Now, Durant's a little bit more versatile. He's not necessarily reliant on going right or left and doing one of those things, but they have tendencies, right? I think that Sensabaugh's got similar tendencies, but maybe he's a little bit more reliant. Finishing with his right hand right now, again, very similar for a lot of younger prospects and guys who are coming into the league rather young, just at 19, 20 years old. That's very, very typical. So I don't want to sound like I'm dragging on Brice Sensabaugh here. I think he's a very intriguing prospect, and honestly, if his defense was more of a sure thing, he'd probably be a lottery selection. I think that's one of the bigger questions around him right now, which is why Brooklyn, who's probably looking for a little bit more half-court punch around Bridges long term, that's why Sensabaugh still makes some sense to me here at this pick. 23, the Portland Trailblazers here. This is another trade spot potentially in my eyes. The reason why is because if Portland's trading pick 2 in this draft, they might be able to attach 23 in there as well to add even more value to a team looking to move, a star, or potentially with some of what Portland has, maybe they try and move this pick up even. But with their pick here, assuming they were to keep it, I would like to see them draft a guy like Jett Howard out of Michigan. And the reason why is because he's got a multi-dimensional skill set. Can handle the ball. He's got a very, very tight handle, honestly, and a very quick handle, which is going to let him get space downhill. Now, he doesn't have the quickest actual athletic step, but because of his handle, his ability to change direction and kind of shift where he's going, I think he's going to find success. A similar comparison, honestly, with the way that he's able to do that is Jalen Brunson. Now, Howard's bigger than Brunson. I think he's less skilled, though, with the ball in his hands than Brunson. He's got a worse pivot foot game. Brunson was one of the best pivot foot users I've ever evaluated, honestly. So, not saying Jett Howard's going to be Jalen Brunson. Jalen Brunson's a heck of a player. But I think, the kind of comparison of he's not really the electric quick, but he knows how to use his quickness and his handle to get where he wants to go. I think he's going to find that success. He's bigger. He's also a decent playmaker. I think he's going to be really, really good off of dribble handoffs right away in his career, which for Portland, I mean, if they're making some moves and moving off of some guys, well, who knows what their roster is going to look like, right? But it gives them a player who can play in a variety of ways. Without the ball, he shot very, very well from behind the three-point line. His catch and shoot numbers were pretty good this year. And I also think just Michigan in general relied on him quite a bit when he was out on the court, and he showcased the ability to play in that style as well, which works out pretty well here for Portland, who might have some big questions to answer in the next couple of weeks or months. Pick 24, the Sacramento Kings here. Again, Kings fans, I want to make sure you guys are big time hyped. I'm going to have a video offseason preview coming out on the channel really, really soon. I'm sure you're going to want to stick around and see that, because I didn't want you guys to dwell on the loss of the Warriors very long. I want you guys to have some new uplifting stuff to talk about, and that's the offseason, because I think the Kings are in a much better spot than I would have projected them to be in 12 months ago, and that's a huge win for this Kings franchise. And De'Aaron Fox and Malik Monk they had such a great season, so I don't want there to be any real negativity around the Kings losing in the playoffs in 7 games to the team that just won the title less than 12 months ago. So a lot of credit to them. And with this pick, I see them adding a guy like Ryan Rupert. Now, I know that they had interest in Matisse Thybulle at the trade deadline, ultimately did not get anything done there. But Ryan Rupert does make a lot of sense as we didn't get Matisse, let's try and go get somebody else. And Rupert defensively is what they're drafting off of the upside there with the length, the athletic traits that he has. Now, I think as a basketball player, he's not very good yet. But that's okay. I'm not saying he's going to be a terrible pick. It's okay to need some developmental time. The Stockton Kings are getting a really good player here. And the reason why I'm saying that, I'm not saying it in a negative way. I know a lot of people just assume, if the guy's spending time in the G League, he's not any good. No, the G League's a fantastic spot for players to develop, improve their game, get serious reps with the ball in his hands, which is what I think Ryan Rupert needs a lot of. The Stockton Kings would probably focus him into their game plan and their offensive way of scoring. He'd become a focal point there. And I think for Sacramento, you don't need him to become an offensive go-to player, but you need him to be able to be a little bit more competent with the ball in his hands than he currently is. But the whole point of drafting him is long-term, giving you another wing defender who fits. The one big question I have for Sacramento is, why did Davion Mitchell not play more than 8 minutes in Game 7? That didn't make any sense to me, but maybe a Ryan Rupert answer could also give them another versatile wing who would match up with wings better than what I think Sacramento currently possesses as well. 25, the Memphis Grizzlies here now, another team that got bounced in the first round. And this one I feel a little bit less romantic about, I'd say, because, well, they kind of asked for it. Dillon Brooks specifically asked for it, and John Morant said, no, we're fine in the West. They turned out to not be fine in the West. But what could Memphis look to add here? And for me, it's a really good player. Brandon Podziemski, he's a left-handed curly-headed sniper who really stepped up his game big for Santa Clara. He's a sophomore. His freshman season he spent at Illinois. He's from Wisconsin. He's a Midwest kid who wanted to play at a Midwest school and just didn't get the minutes that he honestly deserved. So he said, okay, I'm going to transfer. Went out to the WCC and played for Santa Clara. And oh, by the way, his first year there, he was WCC Player of the Year in a conference that has really good players. He played fantastically and really left his mark on the program and changed his realistic draft likelihood from a guy who maybe would have been a back-end second-round pick to what I believe should be a first-round lock at this point. He's a fantastic shooter, shot over 42% from three this past year for Santa Clara. He's got a really clean, repeatable stroke, and he's going to be able to knock it down with regularity at the NBA level, which is already something that I think Memphis needs more of. We saw how important Luke Kennard was for them. Let's get another Luke Kennard-esque player here who is probably a little bit more athletic than Kennard, can probably do a little bit more with the ball in his hands than Kennard, has some defensive questions and limitations, but I think when you have the Defensive Player of the Year on your team, you're going to live with some perimeter defense in order to try and space the floor out a little bit more for your star point guard. 26, the Indiana Pacers on the board now. This pick comes from the Cleveland Cavaliers, and at this spot for Indiana, we're looking to add more wings and we're looking to add more good players. And at this spot, it's a good player who's also a wing. Julian Strawther from Gonzaga, also in the WCC, had a 40-plus point game this year, which I just couldn't believe when that happened, because Strawther's game is not somebody who's a high-volume scorer, but when he's hot, I guess, because he could not miss from three that game. And he's kind of your typical 3-and-D wing who's just going to find a way to stick around in this league. I think he's rather smart. I think he's going to understand and nail rotations pretty quickly. And remember, earlier on we went with Brandon Miller. I think this is another good option here for a guy who is a little bit more pro-ready. And, Indiana's found success drafting in this way. Think about a guy like Nembhard, who they took last year in the draft at pick 31, I believe. 26 year Julian Strawther, I think a phenomenal pickup for them. They really need more wing contributors. I think Strawther year one can be that. He's smart. He's able to knock down shots, and that's really the big thing you're looking for out of 3-and-D style wings. Now, athletically, he has limitations. I think that there could be higher upside picks a little bit later than him in this year's draft. But for Indiana, if you've already moved up and you have your high upside pick in Brandon Miller, who can also give you a pretty steady floor, I think that you go with another good high floor player here and just continue to round out your roster and feel pretty confident about what you're building long-term with all of these guys on rookie deals. Pick 27, Charlotte Hornets now on the board. This pick comes from the Denver Nuggets. And for Charlotte, I'm going to have them go with Kobe Buffkin. Remember earlier on we went with Cam Whitmore, so we already addressed a wing spot. They have their center of the future in Mark Williams. So I thought, let's go BPA here with Kobe Buffkin, who I have down at 27. Now, I know a lot of people see Kobe Buffkin as a higher pick, so I want my viewers here to let me know down in the comment section, what am I missing about Kobe Buffkin? Why should he go higher in some of these mock drafts? Because right now I've been kind of falling in love with him in this like 25 to 28 range, but I do know some people mocking him even up around the lottery. I just don't necessarily see that from the film and the tape I'm putting on, but I want to see what you guys are catching on film and tape, just so I can have maybe a better idea of what to watch for, and maybe something I'm overlooking or missing, or if there's just some tape I haven't reviewed yet on him. Because I've watched pretty much all of these guys' games for the most part. I've seen so much out of all of these players that it's a pretty comfortable talking point for me, where I can record a video that's an hour plus long every single week and talk about different things in the video, because there's a lot of different things to discuss and different ways guys can fit certain places. But I just want to know what I'm missing on Kobe Buffkin. I think he's going to be a bench scorer. I think he's got the ability to handle the ball for a second unit and kind of run an offense while still being able to hand out buckets and kind of fill that traditional scoring backup guard role that we've seen so often in guys like Lou Williams, Jamal Crawford. Does he have that level of success as a 3-time Sixth Man of the Year? Probably not, but he's still going to be a good player, and he's going to be a nice player off the bench. I just think that maybe a little bit lower on his ceiling than others. But for me, the big words there are points per possession, which is how teams tend to look at things a little bit more. And to be honest, it kind of takes out some of the fun of basketball because it feels like you're playing the game with a calculator, which is not how it's supposed to be played. But that's how teams are operating right now, which is maybe why I'm a little bit lower on Kobe Buffkin's draft proposition than others. 28 now, we have the Utah Jazz here. From the Philadelphia 76ers, this is the Royce O'Neal trade. So this pick came through the Brooklyn Nets to get to Utah. And at this spot, I have them going with Leonard Miller. Remember earlier on, we went with 2 guards for Utah in both Anthony Black and Keyonte George. And I think that now is the time for Utah to probably pursue kind of a bigger wing, somebody who's probably going to play the 4 most frequently at the NBA level. And that is Leonard Miller out of G League Ignite. At 6'10", he has flashed in the past a lot of playmaking capabilities. You think about his film with Team Canada during USA or during the U19 FIBA World Cup and some of the FIBA work that he's done. He's played a lot of point forward for them, and he's found some decent success there. Now, sometimes it's very sporadic and wild, which is why an adjustment to his play was necessary this year for the G League Ignite, where he became kind of more of this rebounding monster who could then push in transition, but doesn't necessarily play with the ball in his hands as frequently. And I think really the best mesh point for him in his career is if he gets to a spot where he realizes, like, hey, I could be a really fantastic screen and short roll guy, where if you get me the ball around the nail and all of a sudden I have a 2-on-1, I could make the right read out of this. And I could put the ball into the corner if I have a corner shooter, or if I've got a guy on a cut, I could hit him pretty consistently. And I think Leonard Miller is a really intriguing pick based on that alone. Playmaking with size is always one of those things that gets a lot of people intrigued. You think about why Ben Simmons went first overall in his draft, is because he was a 6'10" point guard. Now, Leonard Miller is not a 6'10" point guard. He's a 6'10" forward who can play make on occasion, is what I look at him as. But you know from where I was a year ago on him that he has taken massive strides forward, and he's a much better prospect than he was 12 months ago, which if you're betting on upside and you're betting on a guy developing, Leonard Miller's already taken huge steps forward with better coaching. And I think the further he gets in his NBA career, the more and more he's going to absorb and learn and improve, which is why Utah, with really good coaching, by the way, and Will Hardy, is going to thrive with a guy like him at 28. 29, Indiana back on the clock. This pick comes from the Boston Celtics in the Malcolm Brogdon trade. And at this spot, I have them going with Dylan Mitchell. So we're again addressing forward, but again, this is a different style forward than what they've gotten so far in both Brandon Miller and Julian Strawther, who are kind of more 3-and-D type wings. Obviously, Miller, you're going to put the ball in his hands a little bit more, and he's going to do some more of that playmaking. Mitchell is a Jared Vanderbilt-esque player, and that's really the best comparison for him, and a guy that if you watch him on film and you just think, okay, Jared Vanderbilt throughout his career has been a pretty decently plus player, somebody who's helped teams make the postseason before. Utah was in a pretty good position with him. Minnesota made the playoffs last year with him in the starting lineup. The Lakers have been very good with him this year after acquiring him. And you kind of watch him, you're like, okay, what does this guy do? Well, he crashes the glass on offense. He is extremely athletic. He challenges shots around the rim, sometimes to a fault, jumping out of position, but still. And he's also a fantastic perimeter defender for his size. Now, at 6'10", he moves very, very well, and he's got a lot of length to offer, and he at least challenges and tries his best to stay in front of guys. I think Dylan Mitchell has all of those same qualities, except he's more athletic than Vanderbilt. I think he's a more natural defender than Vanderbilt. And I think that there's a lot of room, if you develop this kid right, to make him a fantastic player and a star role player. Not a star player, don't get me wrong, but a star role player. And what I mean by that is a guy who you could argue that 3 or 4 years from now, when Dylan Mitchell, if everything goes right and he's playing the way that I expect him to be capable of, he could be the best player in the NBA at that role as a offensive rebounding wing who's going to defend on the perimeter and also block shots on the weak side. And you might say, okay, so does that mean he's that good? No, it doesn't mean he's like a max level player or anything, but it means he's probably playing on the mid-level exception every year. And if that's the case and you got him at 29, it just feels like a home run. Think about how much of a bargain right now Jared Vanderbilt feels like on a $4.5 million team option, or not even a team option, just $4.5 million contract. It feels insane. The value is so good there. And that's what I feel like you might be getting here with Dylan Mitchell. Now, you can't rely on that year one, probably not even year two, but the second half of that rookie contract is going to be so beautiful in my eyes, especially for a team like Indiana, who if you have Brandon Miller, you have Benedict Mathurin, you have Tyrese Halliburton and Miles Turner, do you really need Dillon Mitchell to do anything for you on offense? No, you really don't. You're not going to rely on this guy to play in that way. You don't need some home run pick here. You need a guy who you are comfortable developing into a player that could give you something. And this is something that the Pacers don't have right now. I think that they need more offensive rebounding. I think that a guy like Dillon Mitchell could really provide that for them long term. And also just some grit, toughness, and just pure physicality and athleticism that they also don't possess right now. I would really, really like to see Dillon Mitchell stay in this year's draft. I hope that he gets drafted relatively high. This is one of the picks in this draft that I'm like, okay, I don't know if he's actually going to be drafted in the first round. When you get to 20, like 25 and later, you're like, okay, well, is this guy for sure a first rounder? Wouldn't surprise me if he fell to 40, that kind of thing. Dillon Mitchell could fall to like 50, to be honest. If a team's like, oh, well, we don't really know how to use him, it takes some creativity to use a guy like this in your offense, but I really, really think there's some pros to drafting him. And then at 30, the Los Angeles Clippers here now. This pick comes through Houston via Milwaukee. There's a lot of movement with this pick. This pick has been traded a ton of times seemingly. But the Clippers now at this spot have a chance to add to their roster. And I think there is some questions about Kawhi Leonard, Paul George long-term and how they're going to continue to mesh and build and everything. I think the Clippers would look to possibly trading this pick on draft night. But if not, let's go get a guard. And a guard who can defend in Amari Bailey. I think one thing about the Clippers is they do a very good job evaluating talent on draft night, especially later in the draft. You think about some of their hits in the second round specifically, or guys that I'm comfortable with being on an NBA floor. I think Terrence Mann's a great example. I still think BJ Boston, Jason Preston are two good, project type players who the Clippers just haven't had to play very much, but I think they've shown some promise. And I think Amari Bailey would be another guy that could find instant minutes for this Clippers team, just as a off the bench. He's going to go out there and defend. He's going to work his tail off. You can use him to pick up 94 feet. Is he going to give you a lot of offensive self-creation? Probably not. Is he going to be a dynamic go-to player that gives you 25 points in a game? Probably not. But can he give you 7 points and make the other team's best point guard or best ball handler work? Yes. And again, at pick 30, that's the type of value you're looking for. You're looking for a player who you think has an 8 to 12 year career ahead of them. I think Amari Bailey might be one of those guys in this year's draft. And I think the Clippers have a specific need for that here around this pick, which is why it ultimately does make some sense. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, and also make sure to hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on more future uploads. I hope you guys really did enjoy this video. It was a lot of fun to record this 2023 NBA mock draft with lottery simulation. Again, huge thank you for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you that takes any time to watch any of the videos here on the channel. If you're interested about some of those offseason previews I referenced earlier on, make sure to leave a comment asking for a specific team, or just browse through the channel and see what teams I've already uploaded. There's a lot more coming as well on the channel. A lot of offseason previews planned to be recorded within the next 2 weeks. So I'm very excited for the future of the channel. I hope you guys are as well, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.